So we don't have a big face and a very long tail. So you will have to come with 50 products to fight us. A, that is very difficult. B, even if you go and attack us in 1, 2, 3 cities, we won't make a dent. So you'll have to attack us in over 150 to 200 cities to make a dent. So we have spread ourselves in a way that, yes, saying this, obviously I'm scared all the time, because we have become of a size and stature that the big boys have started taking note of us, and that does worry me. I would be very foolish of me to lie here that I don't worry about that. I worry about it all the time. So it is somewhere, and it also kind of keeps me on edge to do better, to be honest.
To be very honest, if I was a VC, I wouldn't have funded myself. Like, that was how bad the presentation was.
To build scale, you have to think scale.
Sometimes I think too much of money restricts innovation. I think that's a sad part.
So destiny finds you on the road that you take to avoid it.
Whenever you get seat on a rocket ship, you don't ask which seat.
We didn't really ask ourselves too many questions in terms of how big can we get it.
So it was very, very hard to explain what is UGC.
If you want to implement something, first dirty our own hands.
For me, 1 million to 10 million is where scale.
So again, we had basic teams, struggle, but every day was just learning, which was just amazing.
Listen to founders about their stories and how they built their startups. Here on Maharajas of Scale, with me, your host, Krishna Jonakadla, co-founder of Mango Mobile TV and Vouch.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. This is a fabulous Friday afternoon. I love to record on Fridays. Go figure why. And in case you've been living under a cave and you haven't heard our previous 50 episodes, we are live. We are actually today again back with another dynamic entrepreneur, Viraj Bal of Veeba. Veeba is a personal favorite, and the fact that I'm actually a consumer and a fan of their products adds an extra zing. Perhaps I'll try and avoid my bias in the show, but he's doing a fabulous job. Viraj, welcome to the show.
Hi Krishna, thank you so much for having me here. I think it's a proud moment for me to be on Maharajas of Scale, right? So that means you have arrived. When you're on Maharajas of Scale, that's what my team does. You only arrive when you reach Maharajas of Scale.
It's our pleasure. So Viraj, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on right now.
My name is Viraj Bhel. I'm the founder and managing director of Veeba Food Services Private Limited. Veeba is one of India's largest sauce companies, and that's what I do. That's what I'm doing. That's what I've been doing for the last 8 years, and have loved every single day of the journey. So
We'll get back to the backstory a bit. That's the shortest introduction I think I've had any guest provide on our show. Perhaps goes to show how modest you are. I'll come to the sauces part. But I have to say this, okay? And I've always said this even to my wife, that whenever you go out and eat, let's say, a bhel or a kati roll, the real secret ingredient or the thing that actually provides that deliciousness or the taste in it is the sauce. The other ingredients around it in some sense are actually enhancing the sauce, but agar sauce nahi hoti, I always feel it's the sauce is the biggest secret ingredient of any taste. It's the ultimate taste maker.
It's like you are repeating my words in my team meetings. I'll tell you something so strange. Sauce is the biggest unsung hero of the food industry, and I say this unsung because nobody realizes. Now if you look at a burger or a kathi roll or a bhel puri, it is responsible for the least amount of cost in the burger or the kathi roll or the bhel puri, and it is responsible for the least amount and the highest taste. And the customer will notice कि मेरे बन की पैटी क्रम्बल कर रही है या अंदर का चिकन सॉफ्ट नहीं था customer will notice all of those things, but customer will not notice the deliciousness in the burger or the kati or the bhel is actually coming from the sauce. So the most important ingredient is also the protein, and the carb is always more expensive than the sauce. So the most important ingredient of our dish is actually the cheapest and the most critical ingredient of the dish. So it's a very strange thing that you've noticed it, because I mean that is why I entered the sauce business, because that is where everything lies. It binds the product together, it marries the bun with the patty, it marries the crispiness with the softness, and gives all of the taste. So you can have a chicken burger with tandoori mayonnaise, which will become an Indian burger, or you'll have a chicken mayo with a Southwest chipotle dressing and make it a Mexican burger, right? The taste comes from there.
That's right. The funny thing is, when I used to live in New York a long time ago, but when I used to travel to New York, in Manhattan, in downtown New York, there is an Indian restaurant, I don't know if it exists anymore, called Kati Roll Company. The weird thing is, so New York has two airports, and the New York metropolitan area has 3 airports. I would plan my flights to New York in such a way that I either land at John F. Kennedy or LaGuardia, so that on the way to my room, I could stop at Kati Roll Company and actually pick up a couple of rolls. And when I used to analyze them, I would say, chapati, I can make it at home. And the aloo, at that time I'm traveling anyway, but otherwise, the sauce was the thing that actually provided the zing. And I've said that many times. Wow. And for Kati Roll Company, although they were based in New York, they used to have 2 locations. One is what's Midtown, which is where Rockefeller Center are, and then downtown where Wall Street is. People would drive across from New Jersey, which is at least an hour and a half mile, to actually eat their Kati rolls. That's how delicious it used to be, and all because of the sauce in my mind.
So I know it's going to be a fun discussion when we start on this note. So you get me, you understand me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the numbers. What sort of scale have you hit? You said you're the largest sauce maker in the country. So speak to us about that. One of the largest. Okay.
No, I said one of the largest. I'm one of the largest. I can't say for sure that we are the largest, but we must be right there on the top. When I say largest, I'm talking in terms of volume,
sure.
And not value necessarily, because Viva basically has 2 divisions. One is what we internally call the large, our B2B division. And the second is our B2C division, what you eat at home. So the B2B division is a high volume business, but a low margin business. And the retail is now, God has been kind, it's also a high volume business. Things are growing rapidly on the retail front. So Viva, like in terms of revenue, we are, I'm superstitious talking about my numbers, but we are a mid 3-digit kind of a revenue company and growing rapidly. And that's to give you an idea about the scale and the size of our business.
What else can you share in terms of, let's say, cities, and numbers, chains, product lines, so that can do justice to that?
So I'll tell you, I know of companies which are far older than us. Viva is almost 8 now, and I know of companies far older than us or far bigger than us in revenue also. Maybe they've reached 1,000 crores and we've not yet reached that number. But what sets us apart from everyone else is our distribution. Every company, Krishna, looks good in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Pune, and maybe Chennai and Kolkata. But you will find Viva, how we look in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, etc. You will find us in all our glory in a Vellore or a Madurai or a Kodaikanal or a obviously Jalandhar and Ludhiana, but even a Hoshiarpur. So our distribution footprint today is more than 500, almost 550 cities and towns. That is a large footprint. And out of one of the things which I'm proudest about at Viva, I don't know if you can still call us a startup or not, but if we were to be called a startup, one of the things which I'm proudest about is that we are not your typical startup. We are building a traditional FMCG company. So out of our retail revenue, this is something which will actually shock your listeners. Out of our retail revenue, more than 70% of our revenue comes from general trade, GT, mom and pop stores. And remaining 30% comes from modern trade and online. So though we are present in every modern trade and every online format that there is to be present in, and we are crazy about that business. We love to service them. We are really good. We have really good, relations with all of them. But our core business is general trade. We are available in every relevant shop in these 550 towns, and that is what sets us apart. So, if Krishna, you were to tomorrow open a company which competes with Viva, it'll be easy for you to maybe crack into 1 or 2 online accounts or maybe 1 or 2 big national modern trade chains. But for you to come and compete with us against our might of distribution in 550 towns, that is what sets us apart from that is what one of our biggest strengths is. So if you ask me, what are the 2 biggest strengths that Viva has? One is our product innovation. I mean, we are responsible. I'm a very proud Indian, very honestly, and I always say, why can't an Indian company make the best sauces in the world? It's not like making a COVID vaccine. Now Indian companies are making the best COVID vaccine. So sauce to bahut aasan hai. Why can't we make the best sauces in the world? So, innovation. I mean, as a proud Indian, I can very safely say you put my product against any product in the world, and we will come out as good or better than anything else available in the world. And B is our distribution. So our product innovation and product distribution, these are our 2 core strengths, and the whole company rotates around that.
In fact, I'll dig deep into both of them in a short while. But let's understand the backstory a bit. Is Viva your first venture?
Yes, no, Viva is my second venture. I am a failed restaurateur before this. I started a company in 2009 called Pocketful. It was a chain of restaurants. In my peak, I had 6 restaurants. And somewhere my respect for restaurateurs comes from the fact that I'm a failed restaurateur, right? I know how difficult it is to run a restaurant. Even though I say sauce is the unsung hero in the burger, but in the whole restaurant gambit, there are many other things, right? From licenses to real estate and blah, blah, blah. But so I'm a failed restaurateur. I started a chain of restaurants called Pocketful in 2009. 4 very long and very tough years later, I decided to pull the plug. And at that time, I did not realize this, but one of the best things which happened in my life was my restaurant business failing. I mean, it could not have been scripted better. If I was still a restaurateur, I might have been running 30, 40, 50, 60 restaurants. But the failure of restaurants, and also it's a very a naked kind of a failure. When your restaurants are empty, everybody knows you're not doing well, right? You walk into a restaurant at lunchtime and you find it empty, yaar ye company chal nahi rahi. So it's a very public kind of a failure. And so I failed at the restaurants business. And after that, I understood sauce making very well. In fact, my restaurants also had some of the best sauces. That was our secret sauce, so to say, in the restaurant. The taste of the product was loved by everybody, and very much like your kathi kebab. So Pocketful was nothing but we used to sell pockets made out of something that I had invented. I used to call it breadan, a bread which tastes like naan. So it was a naan pocket,
right,
and stuffed with butter chicken or kadhai paneer and stuff like that. And the entire taste used to come from the sauce. And talking to restaurants, I used to wait at my tables continuously, speak with our customers, and talking to all of them gave me a very good sense of what the customer wants. So, but anyways, I made a lot of mistakes. I mean, if I write a book on the number of mistakes I made during the restaurant industry, I could literally write a book on that. I made every mistake. Yeah, I made every mistake possible, Krishna. I mean, my first restaurant was a 150 seater in Lajpat Nagar. You know, when you start from there, you will never make money. But I was very, very cowboyish. I was like, yeah, we can do this, we'll do this. I hired people from some of the, I am always, even today, Viva's team is exceptional. But at that time, I hired from some of the biggest national restaurant chains. I made my corporate office overhead so big that even if I had 30 profitable restaurants, I would never ever break even. And I had here 6 restaurants and half of them were loss making. So it became such a cash sucking, machinery that anything I could do would be too little. And that frankly taught me the biggest lesson of my life. And honestly, without that lesson, Viva would not have been as successful as we are trying to be or as it is right now. So that is something which has really stayed for me. At that time, obviously, I did not know that I am getting a crash course or a MBA or whatever. But the failure of my restaurant business, frankly, was one of the best things which happened for Viva. A, I started Viva because of that, otherwise I would not have. And B, the lessons that I learned kind of stayed with me. So that I would say, now I can, look back and talk to you very philosophically about those times, but they were tough times, I wouldn't lie.
Pretty interesting. So you performed you made 2 cardinal sins, or committed 2 cardinal sins, if you will. One is becoming top heavy and expense led very, very early on. Although the restaurant business does have a certain amount of capital intensity to it, especially if you're having a 150 seater.
Right.
Gosh, that must have been a pretty good sized restaurant. And the second one is you scale much before you actually get traction. Although this is like a traditional business where you need a certain amount of investment. And you were doing another thing which was experimenting with a new type of food.
Absolutely.
If you had to experiment with chaat, which is already well established, and you start a line and then you say, okay, I'm going to expand it, possibly, yeah, but then again 3 new things, and that too a larger one.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let me understand, where did the courage to do that come from? What have you always wanted to be an entrepreneur? What were you doing prior to Pocketful?
So I started my journey. So my parents are from the food industry, or were from the food industry till a long time back, till about 12-13 years back. And if I go back to my school days, and we were a very middle class kind of a family. And my father had a food business, and my father, something which really intrigued me, growing up, that the amount of hard work my dad put was directly proportional to the fruits of his hard work that we got. And that really stayed with me, that if you work hard, and my dad really worked hard. My mother and father both were in that business. They both really worked hard, and I could see, from one car, one Maruti 800, we became a Maruti 800 in a van family, and then we got another. So I could see that, and I was really, really keen on joining my father's business. And my father, had this really long rule that you can only join the family business when you start earning enough money outside to raise your family in the same standard of comfort you have been raised in. So it was a long rule, but itni baar suna hai, so it stayed with me. And luckily we were not doing that well, right? So that number turned out to be 2-3 lakhs a month. That is what my father wanted me to earn in 99,000. And at that time, the fastest way, because I was really keen on joining, and the fastest way of getting there was, I did my industrial marine engineering. I started working for a company called AP Moller, Maersk Line. It's the world's largest shipping company, and they operate oil rigs and merchant navy vessels. But that job pays you really well. So I was very young when I frankly reached my father's threshold of that minimum income. And when I did, I immediately resigned. I joined I came back to my father. I said, Dad, see, I've reached that income that you wanted me to. And Dad, being a man of his word, could not say no to me. So he said, "Chalo, bete, join the business." So I joined the business, and the business, the business. Frankly, I joined, and I've said this publicly many times. The business started doing really well as soon as I joined. And this was around 2003, 2002 and 2003, sorry. And business started doing really well. And I got a lot of credit for the success of that business. And very honestly, like if the biggest moron in the world would have come and sat instead of me, the business would have still done equally well. I just happened to sit on the aeroplane before it took off. If you remember in 2003, that's when modern trade came to India, all the restaurant chains came to India. So food industry was at a, it was ready to burst. So it burst, and I just happened to be there. So people thought he's great. I wasn't great at all. I just happened to be at the right place. And then after that, I stayed with that company. I got a leadership role in that company towards late 2008 or so. But 2008 end, my father decided to sell the business, and we sold the business to an MNC, and the family moved out. I stayed back with the new formed entity for a year, and a year later, I decided to I always wanted to, as I said from childhood, always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So 2009, I left that business and started my restaurant chain. Never ever thinking that I'll do anything other than the restaurant chain. But as luck would have it, my restaurant business did not do well. And when it did not do well, I understood food processing. That was, my passion in life and my calling in life. So I decided to kind of shut the restaurant business and, get back and get into sauces. Basically.
Interesting. Let's go back to so was the family in a restaurant business, or what exactly was the business?
No, the family was actually in a sauce business.
Oh,
it was in a sauce business.
Okay,
yeah.
And it was B2B sauces, supplying it to Indian restaurants.
No, it was B2B and B2C both.
Okay,
yeah.
So in some sense, you were coming back to your roots, so to speak.
In some sense, I was coming back to my roots. I understood the process, but when I came back, I was very clear about one thing, that the products I bring to market should not be a me too of what is already there in the market.
Right.
So, like typically if you see mayonnaise has between 50, 60, 70% fat. But when we brought, the Southwest Chipotle dressing or the mint mayonnaise or the olive oil mayonnaise, we reduced the fat content from 60% to 20%. So I was not competing with anyone. I was doing something which was not done in India before that, or at least not done to, the best of my knowledge. So my intention was, why create? I am yet to come across any mother or girlfriend or husband or, who says that, let me give my kids, aaj main sasti sauce khareed ke deta hu, let me save 10 rupees on. So I said, I'll make the best product and let the cost be whatever it is. So we are more expensive than our honorable opposition, but the thing is, when we came into the market, the idea was very different. Let's create the best sauce and let the ingredients decide the price. So fat, Krishna, fat gives the reason of putting fat in mayonnaise is it gives richness and creaminess to the mayonnaise. But what I thought, if we can reduce the fat and still maintain the same richness and creaminess, turns out you have to remove fat and put something like milk, which is far more expensive but gives the same taste and creaminess. So we made our sauces vegetarian and we reduced the fat content, and that is how we went to the customer. And when I started Viva, I was very clear that Viva will be a B2C company. But B2C is a long drawn battle. It takes time to build a national brand and all of that. So I needed volume of scale, And to get volume of scale, at that time, in my naivety, I thought first I will conquer B2B. Once I've done B2B, I will go into B2C. Little realizing that, conquering B2B was not easy. But for the first 3-4 years of our existence, we were a purely B2B company. Once we got volume and scale in B2B, that is when we entered B2C. And once we entered B2C, the customer gave Viva so much love. I I mean, I could not have anticipated this is the amount of love we'll get from our consumers. We have a study which says that more consumers of Viva buy 2 SKUs than 1 SKU. Which FMCG company has that, So you will find more people going to the market and buying 2 of our variants rather than 1. So we've got 2, 1 and then 3. So this is the amount of love we got, and I mean, I would really be lying to say I planned everything. I did not plan it. It happened. So, yeah.
So you sold that, that was Fun Food, wasn't it? The brand?
Yes.
Okay. And
yes. I did not sell it. It was my father's to sell.
Got it.
I did not sell it.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, sauces, they do 2 things. One is, not only do they bring that they are the thing that actually binds everything, they are the taste maker in that particular dish, they also drastically reduce the cook time for a lot of things. I think that's the other side of it, right? So for instance, I mean, I've lived in the US for more than a decade. Your choices are somewhat limited. You get peanut butter and jelly and jam, but we Indians have a thing for spice, and we want spicy stuff. And on the spicy side, you hardly have anything. So about 4 or 5 years ago, when I started seeing all of the mayos appear, I would think, because if you go to a Subway, in Subway you have mint mayo, you have Southwest Chipotle, you have chili, you have another, you have the normal mayo, you have sweet onion, you have all of these. And then I used to constantly wonder, why don't they come out with these options? Because if it's available for restaurants, if the same thing was available for a normal Indian kitchen, they would be able to make so much interesting stuff with it. And that's when we realized Viva started doing it. So we've been watching the flavors grow.
Thank God, Krishna, thank God I realized it before you realized it. Maybe otherwise you would have started Viva. I had the same epiphany, same to same. I was like, yeah, these sari sauces, there are millions of customers of this chain who are willing to buy these sauces, but nobody's giving it to them. So let me be the one taking it to them. But let's improve it. Let's make it healthier and tastier and better for you and all of that. So, I mean, our sauces are all better for you than what you get at any chain and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, the same thing I thought. Luckily, I thought it before you. Otherwise, maybe it would have been a different story.
No. One of my pet things, because I'm such a big lover of chili, when we used to make burgers in the US, we used to have a few Hispanic or Latino friends, people from Mexico and then South America. Chilies originated. Mexico is supposed to be the land where chilies originated. You have so many types of chili. The normal Indian knows about the normal chili, and then there are 3 or 4 in South India, and then you have Bhut Jolakia from Assam, which is the spiciest natural chili on the planet. But then again, in Mexican cooking, you have poblano, you have jalapeno, you have habanero, chipotle, and then the habanero thing. It is so small, but it's so potent. So we would chop and add it to our burgers and then consume them, and we would eat a whole habanero just with one burger. And even the Mexicans who are used to habanero, they would actually tell me, God, I can't believe this is the level of spice you eat. And that's my thing with chili. So one of the sort of things on my bucket list on to do on things, businesses to start, is this store called Chili, and bring all types of chili from the planet. And for every, so if it's habanero, to have 10 separate varieties of how habanero can be created. A sauce, a relish, a pickle, maybe, crushed, dried out habanero to add. So I don't think I would have started Viva. But that's how fascinated I am.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, if you've had a Bloody Mary anytime, which is a cocktail, so the Bloody Mary has this
Worcestershire sauce, yeah.
Well, the Tabasco is there. There's the Worcestershire sauce.
Yeah, of course.
Worcestershire sauce.
The British
the
brand.
Leah and Perrins, there's a brand, the original creators, right? So they are known for that sauce, the British brand. But if you're a vegetarian Indian, although it's not the spiritual side of it,
yes.
But if you're a vegetarian Indian, you have to. The original sauce actually has anchovies in it. So, which is anchovies is a fish. And if you read up about it, you'll say, no, I want a sauce which doesn't have anchovies in it. And for the longest time, I kept looking for a sauce which didn't have anchovies, and only recently found it, so I can have my Bloody Mary without the anchovies in it. It tastes a lot better. So when you spoke about making it vegetarian and actually reducing the fat, I could relate to it that the consumer actually wants something like that.
So the traditional Caesar dressing, the recipe of Caesar dressing has anchovies in it. Now, anchovies and Parmesan cheese, that's where the taste comes from. And when I wanted to make Caesar, and I wanted to make Caesar for India, and mass of our population is vegetarian, so I wanted, but without anchovies, you don't get the original taste. I kid you not, it took us months to create the taste of anchovies in a vegetarian format, and then make our Caesar. That's how we actually launched our Caesar finally. And I mean, I can't share with you how we did it, but that's our secret sauce in our Caesar sauce, because we actually created a vegetarian
Caesar dressing
taste, and Caesar is one of our most loved and best-selling products in the market today, and it's 100% vegetarian. So I mean, funny anecdote from. So okay, there's a rule. All my friends have this rule with me. My wife has this rule with me. When I start talking about my products, I can go on. So you just have to raise your hand. Then I'll know I'm talking too much about the product. I'll stop. Because, I am a person. I go bonkers when I'm talking about our products.
That's all good because... that's all good because we want to jump in. I'll touch upon the creative process in a second. But ranch has bacon in it as well, right? Yes. So the original ranch has bacon in it. A lot of... So when we used to live in the US, we would pick up every product and read the ingredients and say, "Acha, isme kya hai?" And not because we didn't like it or anything, because we knew that if that was in it, perhaps we possibly may not like the taste, and we would hate to throw that out. But it's amazing what you've done. Let's go back to the beginning, the 2009 timeframes.
Right.
What did the playbook look like at that point in time? Because your family had already run and built and sold. What was the playbook in your mind? And you alluded to the fact that you wanted it to be B2C. Sorry,
so that is not 2009. Sorry, that is not 2009.
2009 sorry, that's Pocketful, right?
Pocketful.
So 2000.
Viva started in 2013.
Yes. That's right. So what did that, did you benefit from the playbook that your parents had already executed? So talk about it from two perspectives. One is the distribution angle that you spoke about, and the other angle is actually the creating the sauces itself. Talk about the beginning.
So the beginning, the beginning was tough. I will not kind of mince my words around it. I mean, I was again, after all my cockiness and overconfidence had already finished by the failure of one business. I was tight on cash, and my wife played a very important role. I was very clear that I want to start the sauce business, and my wife, like when I went to her, I was half expecting a fight, but I went to her saying that I want to sell. We had bought a house for ourselves, which we were planning to build our dream house and all of that. I told her I want to sell that to start this company, and I was expecting a couple of punches on the face kind of a thing. but my wife agreed. Many spouses would not have done that, and my wife agreed to to sell our future dream house for me to start Biba, and that's where the seed money came from. And so starting Viva, it happened like that, and then we ran out of funds almost immediately, and I raised some outside equity. Though you have to understand, my father had a very, very liberal ESOP program for me, and in my naivety, I thought I've really earned all the money that I've got from that ESOP plan at the previous company. But in actuality, it was my father's way of giving us the money without really making us feel that he's gifted it to us. It was a very liberal ESOP plan. I mean, nobody gives the ESOP plan which is that liberal. So that is where my seed capital for life came from, which I kind of burned down in the restaurant company and buying that one house. All that money was finished there. So the restaurant company, we shut down. The house, my wife agreed to sell, and I'm really thankful to her for agreeing to do that. And once we sold the house, that's where the Viva seed money came from. And after that, we ran out of money almost I ran out of money almost immediately, and I went out and did a fundraise at that time. And then the first 1.5 years, again my strategy was very clear. In research and development, in our R&D center, we will start working on our retail products on day one, get our B2B volume, and then go into B2C. And in my mind, getting the B2B volume was very easy, but it wasn't. The first 1.5 years, I did everything possible to get that business. It took a lot of time, almost 18 months of struggling before, and those 18 months, Krishna, you have to understand, were very difficult. There was no business, there was no money, and we had salaries to pay. It was just a difficult time. And you have to also understand my mindset. I'd just come out of a failure at that time. So it's not easy failing again and then again, right? But this time I just had my back against the wall. I had nothing else to fall onto. And finally, we kept at it. We were a small group of people at that time, and we kept at it. And I remember a year and a half later, we got our first order from Domino's, and I will never forget that. 70 tons of sauce ka business either. That order took almost 9-10 months to get, but that gave me hope that company chal jayegi, band nahi karni padegi. That was a big mental relief. And we then slowly after Domino's, we got Pizza Hut, and then KFC, Taco Bell, Burger King, Starbucks, and slowly after a very, very difficult first 1.5 years, we started getting little bit more business. And 3 years later, I realized we've reached a revenue and a volume where now I am comfortable getting into the start of the fight of retail. So 2017, I said, chalo, let's enter retail now. And the products were ready, right? The innovation at the R&D center was happening. At that time, it was not an R&D center. It was me and our head of R&D, two of us working. Now, yes, we've got a whole center and a team and all of that. But so me and her, we used to work on our products every day and kept perfecting the products, but never launched them because we were not ready to launch in retail. Then we launched in 2017. And once we launched in retail, we were first a Delhi-only company. Then we did a little bit of Punjab. Then we, and again today I can say that we built a beautiful national distribution system. The idea was not to build a national distribution system. The idea was very simply how to increase our monthly revenue. That was the idea. The idea was how to go and, go to Punjab, go to Ludhiana, go to Jalandhar, go to Nagpur. If Bombay doesn't have space to us, let's go Nagpur, Pune, and then Bombay. So one of the reasons we built a large distribution system, because metros were already taken. So we had to go out, get revenue, and then come in. That was the need of the hour. And today, yes, we are. I mean, in metros, we probably are really on top. But it was again not planned. It was more necessity and less planning. We needed the revenue and we had to go out. That was the story till about the first 100 towns. And after the first 100 towns, and when the consumer gave us so much love, that is frankly when I realized that we're sitting on a really potentially big company, and the Viva brand is getting respected and loved and all of that. So I said, if we are making such good products and we are, healthier than what is available in the market, our whole concept is better for you. Our products are better for you. That does not mean they are they're better than what is available in the market, right? So I do not, my mayonnaise has low fat, but I will not tell you that subah Chyawanprash ki jagah you start eating my mayonnaise. It won't replace. It is healthier than what is available in the market, right? It's not an immunity booster or something like that. So I'm joking, but better for you products. And after 100 towns, and when we realized we're getting so much love, that is when I said, okay, let me take a step back. Now we have come of a size, we can take organized bets. And that is when we made our national strategy. And that is, I'll never forget, about 3 years back, I said, let's go to 500 towns. And I remember my team thinking, ye to pagal aadmi hai. Every time he says something which is bizarre. But 500, and today we're doing 500 plus towns and doing well in those towns. So that is how it all fell into place, actually.
I'm a little. I have two questions here. One, and I think again you made a passing mention of a very profound point. Possibly, I will draw an analogy to battle or war here, where you said, if I don't get space in Mumbai, I'll actually go to Nagpur, I'll actually go to Pune. You actually went and surrounded. In effect, it's almost like a king. He can't actually take the fort, and then he decides to dig all around the fort and then say, "Acha, ab kahan jaoge?" So you're all surrounded. You have no choice but to give up your fort to me, right? So, but how did you crack that part? Because in retail, getting your product on that shelf is really the name of the game. Getting those retailers to carry, and India is a largely unorganized market, which means there are established distribution players, but it's largely a possibly family-driven market. How did you conquer the first 100? What were some tactics you employed? The reason I'm asking is, about a decade ago, maybe actually not even a decade ago, around the time you were contemplating launching Pocketful, a family member wanted to launch a product which was in the coconut water, dehydrated coconut water space. And so he was discouraged. There was a large distributor in Bangalore. He said, you'll have to call, you have to host parties at 5-star hotels, you have to do this, you have to do that. It is not tumhari bas ki baat nahi hai. So that was sort of the short and what he said. But I actually disagreed with him, saying that no, there is an angle to this. It can be done, it will be done, but it's just you following that playbook. So what was the playbook to get to that 100, and how did you crack that? Because that's the secret sauce of scale and distribution, if you will.
Frankly, how do I put it? There was no secret sauce to this, but it was more, for some reason, retailers of West, for some reason, do not even trust companies of North. That is, so if a Bombay company starts and a Delhi company starts, if ideally both should start at zero, but if the Bombay company is starting at zero, a Delhi company starts at -3 or -5, and I don't know किस दिल्ली वाले ने जाके किस Bombay retailer के साथ क्या बुरा किया था, that we are all kind of suffering because of that. But the simple thing is that we went to the retailers with our hands folded and said, okay, sir, we are here, we are a new company, we will come every week to you, we are making quality products, and if I can, today I know why we succeeded, and that is at that time I did not know that, but a lot of companies, and I'm literally letting out $1 million secret over here. Probably more than 1 million, much more than $1 million secret. A lot of companies, the mistake they do is they go and stock the shelf with a lot of raw material. At that time, we did not have the capacity to build so much raw material inventory. So what we did was second thing is I wanted the retailer and us to have a conversation every week. So what I said that if this shop sells 30 pieces, let's give him if he sells 30 pieces in let's say a month, so typically what every FMCG company even today they do is they give him 30 pieces. I said let's give him only 10. So the distribution teams were not happy at that time because that meant more work for them. But in hindsight, what we realized that when we gave them 10, 5 were sold. So in the retailer's mind, 50% of his stock was sold in this first week itself. And then, somebody from Biba is coming next week and saying, "Acha sir, ye big gaya hai. Humne aapko jo stock diya tha, half of that is sold. So can we give you half more?" Very often the retailer will say, "Acha, no, don't give me half more. Give me 7 pieces more instead of 5 pieces more." And that is how we built. And now we realize that is the way to build a retail brand. That is the way when the retailer gets your confidence that this company is not going anywhere, they're coming every week, they're not dumping stocks on me, and they're not making us. And at that time we started a thing, but we followed a rule which was already there, that we said, sir, keep our stocks. If they're not selling, don't give us the money. You keep our stocks, and if they're sold. And because we were doing that, in any case, it was not in our interest to give him 50 pieces. It was in our interest to give him 10 pieces. Because if 10 pieces sold, we get 100% of our money. But if we gave him 50 and 10 pieces were sold, we would only get 20% of our money. And I now talk to a lot of younger FMCG companies, and the amount of times I hear them saying, "Krishna, that we went to the shop and we bought the whole display package and we took 4 shelves and filled it up with our stock." And in my mind, the first thing I'm thinking is, my God, this guy is so passionate about it, but now I have to tell him to not do this because it's not good for the long term. Because when a startup goes and takes the whole shelf and fills it with stocks from shelf number 4 to shelf number 1, the fact of the matter is only 2% or 3% of his stock will be sold, because there are incumbents sitting, there are big boys sitting, there are other players sitting. No startup has the kind of traction to sell 4 shelves or 4 shelves 8 wide, 8 deep. I mean, we're talking about something close to 700-800 bottles. Either it's a personal care brand or a food brand or a beverage brand, whatever it is. No startup, and that is the mistake most people make. So if my first advice to anybody starting in retail is always start very slow. The retailer is the key. If you win the retailer's trust, then you can become a successful retail company. And shockingly, you win the trust of Bombay retailer. Trust me, I don't know how it happens, but the Bangalore retailer comes to know, or the Andhra Pradesh retailer comes to know, Hyderabad retailer comes to know. So you have to go at it city by city patiently. Don't go and dump stocks, because you will lose the retailer's confidence. And also, all startups are financially tight at that time, right? So at that time, why invest all of your liquidity into stocks which are not getting sold in the market? So yeah, that frankly is, at that time, again, I'm being very clear about it. At that time, I did not know what I'm doing. We did it because of necessity. We were extending credit in the market, so we did not want to have too much stock, and we did not have financial muscle to build that much stock. So it happened, and later we realized, and once we realized, we applied the same playbook from town number 101 to 500. But 0 to 100, when we were doing it, we did not realize it. But now it's a proven, tested thing,
But in this case, you built your distribution, all of it yourself, which means you haven't had intermediaries, the traditional, your factory depot to clearing and forwarding agent to redistribution stockist to wholesaler to distributor to final retailer, you have bypassed that entire chain. But at all?
No. We have that entire chain. Today we have our own depots in most of the states, but at that time also from company to warehouse to distributor to retailer, we followed the whole chain. The only thing which I did not do, and I still don't, I'm very very clear about that, is that we as a company, there are these large, the one your uncle spoke about, these large organized distributors who want the whole state or two states or the whole chunk. The retail is the key in
Right.
FMCG. You just can't go and give your car's key to someone, right? So once these large distributors come in, they are literally holding you by they are controlling you, after that. So it's best to build it yourself instead of having one large distributor for a state like Andhra Pradesh. Have 50 small distributors, because once you have one large distributor, trust me, he will start pulling the shots. He will tell you what to do, he will tell you what not to do. Till the time you become a Unilever or a Nestle, then the big distributors also follow what the company says. But I'm saying till that time, you need to have your own distribution. You need to be control of your own destiny, if you may say so. But the idea, frankly, we have never thrown a party,
Sure.
that 5-star party with models for our distributors or retailers. We have not done that in any of the states. We have done it the old-fashioned way. Won the trust, took a bit more time maybe, but that's how we've built the brand.
So let's talk about the product angle a bit, and because the product angle, when you started way back in 2017,
we launched with
how many
14
flavors did you have?
Yeah,
You launched with 14, and the 14 are
the ones you were
mostly
thinking of launching.
and
The ones you were
I'll
thinking, the
clarify
14
in a
are mostly
minute
the
what
ones
I mean.
you were thinking. So the Southwest
No,
Chipotle, mint mayonnaise,
no.
olive oil dressing, sweet onion, and American mustard,
Right.
like those kind of products.
Right. So what I meant was more of more of the international flavors, not necessarily Indian. So my question there is, barring the metros, that suits a certain type of a consumer that prepares a certain type of food. So what was the thinking behind actually going? If you're selling to Domino's and Pizza Hut and Burger King, obviously it is those kind, because that's the kind of food they make. But once you're actually deciding to go B2C, because when you talked about initially building, if you couldn't get Mumbai, you built all the others. So I'm a little curious how you chose those flavors. That was one. Was it an outgrowth of the B2B business? And second, when you spoke to all of these distributors, what was the conversation? Because if you are in tier 2 towns, you're not essentially expecting people to use mint mayo and then Southwest Chipotle, because their type of food is a little different. Or am I wrong there? So talk about why you chose the flavors, and did you get any pushback or any skepticism from the distributors?
So frankly, the reason I chose these flavors, and you have to understand that these flavors, though hugely, as I said, I'm a really proud Indian, and frankly, it ashames me that we have some of the best raw material available in India, but the Indian, we are still not using. How shameful is it that, it might be a good product or it might not be a good product, but turmeric chai latte, Starbucks had to make turmeric famous in US before the Indian food industry woke up to, let's do something with turmeric. So the point I'm trying to make, that we have all our sauces, though amazingly, amazingly international, but I have always kept my Indianness and the root of Indian ingredients. So let me give you a few examples. So the Southwest Chipotle, now we actually import the you can't make an authentic Southwest Chipotle without getting the authentic Mexican Chipotle pepper. So we will get it, but what we will do is we will put a bit more than what a Mexican company might do, because as soon as we put a bit more, it becomes spicy, much like your habanero burger. You consume the whole habanero pepper, something like that. So what I am telling the Indian customer is you are getting the original Southwest Chipotle, but adapted to Indian taste. So for Indians who did not understand Southwest Chipotle, they did understand the spicy, creamy, tasty mayonnaise or a dressing. So, it was that. Now, sweet onion sauce is probably, after ketchup, the second most American sauce in the world. But if you take Viva sweet onion, there's a beautiful Indian ingredient called kalonji. Its onion seed is called kalonji. In our sweet onion, and this is again, I'm giving a product secret, but in our sweet onion, you will find kalonji seeds. And when you put it on your dressing, you're not realizing this, but when you're having a sweet American sauce, you get a burst of a kalonji seeds bitterness, which the Indians know because they've been having it in their food since the beginning of their birth. So that has been introduced. So it's an Indian flavor, but it's an American sauce, the original American sauce, Indianized. Our Bhoot Julakia sauce. Now imagine, we've got one of the best peppers in the world, but we have totally, given it up. We're not even, the Indian food industry is not even working. But our Bhoot Julakia sauce is, mind-boggling. Yes, it's spicy. I can't have it with my, on top of everything. But why shouldn't an Indian company, when you've got such a beautiful pepper available in Northeast India, why shouldn't an Indian company make a beautiful sauce out of it, or any other, or noodles or jam, whatever the thing might be? But we need to own. I hope very soon we'll be able to launch a beautiful turmeric-based product in the market. So we need to do more as Indian food industry. We need to do a bit more. So to answer your question, I did two calculations at that time. Where all are McDonald's? How many number of cities are McDonald's, Domino's, and Subway present in at that time? And if those cities, and the number, mind you, is much more than 100. So if those cities, people are opening up to McDonald's and Domino's and Subways, then they know that these sauces can be used, And now, let me take these sauces to them. International sauces modified to an Indian taste bud, but while maintaining the authenticity of those sauces. So my Southwest Chipotle, when you take it to a global Southwest Chipotle, everybody will, and I have taken it globally, and people have given it, they would say, wow, it's so tasty, but it's a bit spicy, But for us Indians, it's not, oh my God, I need Coca-Cola on top of this or something like that. It's tasty, period, But it is still as authentic as the real deal. So we've kept the sauces authentic, but little bit of Indian palate tweaking has been done. And we, again, please understand, at that time, the aim was not to be in 550 towns. The aim was to be in 100 towns. And I realized that these chains are already there. People have some amount of focus. So we will have to go there, and slowly we will do tasting sessions. We will do, none of our honorable opposition built tier 2, tier 3 because, maybe Big Bazaar became from 0 to 500 stores. So their sales, so everybody's sales were growing. Nobody put in effort in the tier 2, tier 3. In our case, because we needed the revenue, we went to tier 2 and tier 3, and we put booths, we actually put booths where we used to make people taste sandwiches and stuff like that. And there's this story, I will never forget this. I've repeated this in the past also. We were at a stall in a very small area in Punjab, and this lady, a rural looking lady, I'm just trying to make you imagine, a rural looking lady came to our stall and she said, "Ye kya khila rahe ho?" So we said, "Ma'am,
Sure.
Ye sandwich hai." So she tried, she loved the taste. She said, "Kaise banaye hai?" So we said, "Ma'am, ye bread liye, we have this carrot and cucumber sandwich spread. We put it on this and put another bread and gave it to you." Kehte, "No, I don't believe it, because it can't be everything, I'm getting carrots also, cucumbers also, and spread, and it can't come from one bottle. You make it in front of me and show me. As if she was not believing us. So we said, okay, we made it in front of her, we gave it to her, she tried it, she loved it. And that picture, she bought 12 bottles and went. So it made me realize that, nobody has come to them and given that market the importance it deserves. People have that kind of, if they found something tasty, she's bought 12 bottles. I have not seen that happening in Khan market or some of the most poshest markets when we put our stalls, that a lady comes and buys 12 bottles and goes away. So I realized that, wow, this is an opportunity. So we made a small team and we started going to smaller towns, putting tasting booths, and made people, that also kind of made us the first mover in all those markets. So that did well for us.
So that's awesome. So you use these Pizza Hut, Domino's chains, and the presence that they had as proxy for you to understand that there is a market for something like this. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. Thanks for
yeah. So maybe a town which had only one Domino's, we would have left it. But towns which had 4 or 5 Domino's,
amazing.
We would go there.
So let me ask you this.
Something like
that. Lamb vindaloo, right? For the vegetarian, you have aloo vindaloo. So the sauce that goes into making the vindaloo.
Aloo vindaloo, yeah.
So my question is, and then again, I don't know if this was because of the legacy of the business that your family was in back then. In a normal person's mind, the type of consumer that actually consumes a Burger King or a Domino's or a Pizza Hut is smaller compared to the consumer that actually consumes a paneer tikka or a lamb vindaloo or bangan bharta. All of them also need sauces. Well, maybe bangan bharta possibly doesn't need, it requires you to make everything from the ground up. But something like a aloo vindaloo or lamb vindaloo, this requires. And even a lot of the makhanwala, veg makhanwala, all of that also are made from the same sauce from the ground up, right? So, how come, did you ever think of that? Or was there some rationalization that har maa uski apni tarike se banati hai, so she has her own, so therefore the chances of me standardizing that possibly doesn't exist? Did those kind of sauces ever enter the domain of your thinking? If so, why didn't you go ahead with them? Or if not, why did you drop them?
So till about almost it was our COVID launch. Till about 9-10 months back, we never ventured into anything regional. The idea was very simple, Krishna. We, like this is popularly said, everyone knows this. In India, the taste changes every 100 kilometers.
Right.
And I did not want to get into a space, even a mango pickle. Like a company which is today making mango pickle has to make one for Punjab, one for North India, UP, one for Delhi, one for West India, one for South India, one for Andhra Pradesh. I wanted we are bringing international taste across the country. I did not want to get into a gambit of 5. Now, Goan ko pork vindaloo chahiye, but jo North Indian pork vindaloo ya lamb vindaloo khata hai, it's very different from the, the spices are changed.
Got it.
So I was very clear that I don't want to get into 100 kilometers, I can't manage it. It's not possible. So we will be responsible for bringing authentic, international, better for you and tasty products into the country. And it was very clear in my mind. Now, 9-10 months back, COVID hit and we launched a sub-range called Viva Chef. Viva Chef, we have products like, makhni, butter chicken gravy. But in that also, bulk is Asian. So Kung Pao gravy, Szechuan gravy, Thai gravies, black bean gravy. We realized a lot of people are sitting at home and they want to eat restaurant style food. So we very clearly came and said, ये आपकी माँ के हाथ का बना हुआ खाना नहीं है. This is restaurant ke chef ka bana hua khana in a bottle. So it's a ready gravy. All you have to do is add water and chicken. Everything else, from onion to oil to fat to coconut milk, everything is in this. You just add chicken or vegetarian, add paneer or whatever, and water. Nothing else. 2 ingredients. Everything else is in the product. So, but this is a small range meant for at-home cooking during COVID. It's doing really well. But I don't know what the future would hold for a range like this post-pandemic. But before this, the idea was very clear. I don't want to get into a confusing taste bud region debate. International taste, authentic products, really tasty, healthier, better for you, and that's our USP. So I'm very clear about that.
Fascinating. So then talk to us a little more about the creative process. How do you, and I'll give you a little bit of a backstory. There's a chain of restaurants called Genghis Grill in the US. It's actually a Mongolian barbecue.
The name suggested
Mongolian barbecue is very... So Mongolian barbecue is, funnily enough, I'm vegetarian. And it's mostly a choice thing, not a spiritual thing. But the thing what Genghis Grill did in the US was it took normal Mongolian barbecues which would look very messy and would just have meats and proteins, everything mixed up, and separated it out and provided a great environment to have it. So a friend of mine called Al Bhakta runs that, and he scaled it across the country. And what he does is in his office, he's got a live kitchen. So there's administration and operations, and he's got a live kitchen. And what he does is he gets people from the outside, and they're constantly cooking up stuff, dishing out stuff. So he gets if he spots an interesting roadside chef or a small restaurant chef, he'll invite them over, and then he'll get them to whip up something. And for him, that's the way of introducing new flavors or experimenting. And of course, there's feedback coming and him observing from other chains as well. What is your creative process? You already spoke about the international sauces. For instance, I'll ask you, there are 2 sauces which I love, by the way. The chili harissa, that's one. And then there is the chili oregano.
Oh yeah.
Those 2 are beautiful. So you have to add me to the list of that rural looking lady, because the last time about a month and a half ago, even before I even knew that we were going to talk to you, I visited the local Namdharis, and then I looked at the number of flavors and said, gosh, this is fantastic, and I'm going to take every one of those. So har ek flavor ke liye ek kharida.
Amazing.
And then we came home, and then and so the next question I was asking in my mind is, I've not seen a harissa, I've not seen a take like this on oregano. So what's the creative process? How do you come up with this? How do you identify those? Do you have a method? Have you institutionalized it?
So the method is, a lot of the sauces that we make are never made in the world before. Like, so harissa traditionally is a paste, but how do you convert that into a dressing? So,
right.
One fine day I was ordering pizza from one of the chains, and I said, "Okay, yeah, please oregano or chili flakes ज़्यादा डाल दे." And when I kept this thing down, I realized that imagine the amount of pizza Domino's and Pizza Hut put sell together in the number of houses, and every household I know asks for extra chili flakes and oregano. I realized that chili flakes and oregano is India's most widely consumed condiment, and it just dawned on me that, my God, what is happening? So next day I went to R&D and we created a sauce which was basically chili and oregano, which you get in the... my mouth is watering while thinking about that sauce. I really like that sauce actually. So, chili and oregano is actually a sauce which goes to more households than even tomato ketchup, because it is so widely spread. Everybody's consuming, a 35 rupee pizza also. So I said we have to create, and now you have that sauce with pizza. Pizza means tomato base.
Right.
So I said, yeah, everybody already knows the taste subconsciously of tomato, chili flakes, and oregano. Let's just combine all of that in a sauce. We put it out there, and we did not realize it was an instant super hit. Everybody knew the taste. Whoever would taste it once would keep buying the bottle. And so chili oregano came like that. Harissa, actually I came across harissa. So when you travel, you come across different sauces, different ingredients. So because my mind, and also the mind of the people who work in the R&D center, we're always constantly thinking. So I was traveling somewhere in the Middle East, and I got this harissa paste. I just loved the flavor. And I said, it's so difficult to consume this product. It was a painstaking thing. Why not, take this product and make it convenient. And the best part is, all the spices are the spices that Indians love. Cumin, chilies, coriander, all of those spices that we have grown up with. But how do you take that, make it convenient, a bit tasty for India to consume? So so ideas come when you're traveling, ideas come when you're talking to people, ideas come when you're when you're eating something local somewhere. Ideas come when you're talking about some specific, like bhoot jalappi as an ingredient. I was speaking with someone, and I realized that we need to do something with it. Knowing that it's a very small product, like mint mayonnaise. Mint mayonnaise is nothing but the humble hari chutney marrying an international mayonnaise. And so our mint mayonnaise is more Indianized than, let's say, American mint mayonnaise. But so we have taken not only mint and coriander, we have also taken the spices of the hari chutney. Now a company in America might not do it. They'll just take mayonnaise, mint and coriander. We have to take mayonnaise, mint and all the spices which go in the hari chutney. So every product comes, the inspiration comes from the most least expected times. And sometimes you actually actively go online researching products. Sometimes you actively go in the market, So I have a sacrosanct rule. Obviously, when I'm traveling, I have this even more at that time. But when I'm in India also, I will choose the most high-end retailer of that city I am in. And I spend 2-3 hours just roaming in all the aisles, and I might come back with 50 products. Now, these 50 products might not be sauces, but might be an inspiration for a sauce, which we can launch in the future. So that is where all the product ideas come from, and people. So I everybody, Krishna, is an expert on food. Everybody. So the every person knows ke mere ko, if you make a panel and you ask them, कि ये product कैसा है, everybody will say इसमें यार नमक कम है, या चीनी ज़्यादा, या मिर्ची कम है, my panel is always surprised. So let's say I have 5 friends, 5 couples coming over to our house for dinner. What we will do is, with our snacks, we will put 2 or 3 dips. Now, without telling them that we were thinking of launching this or we are planning to do this, if I see people going for that dip again and again, that means people have liked it. But as soon as, and that dip, they will finish it also. They will finish the whole bowl of that dip. But as soon as you ask them, कि boss, ये मैं launch कर रहा हूँ, क्या? Oh, suddenly they all turn into master chef or someone like that, and they'll start giving me so much feedback. Because food is, everybody is an expert on food, and rightly so. Every customer, I know what I like in my food, you know what you like in your food. So food is something which people should be made to ask. I mean, without taking the brand's name, we have done blind tasting with some of the biggest international brands for our dressings and their dressings. The blind tasting, we came out 9 out of 10, and that international brand, which is one of the biggest brands in the world, came at 7.5 out of 10. Now, the same group, we got them tasted in our bottles. Viva's bottle, and you have to understand that audience had never seen a Viva bottle before in their life. It was an international audience. suddenly our score dropped to 6 and the other brand's score became 9. And then in the 4th round, we told them, gentlemen and ladies, this is what happened. In blind tasting, you gave Viva more score than, and they all challenged us. They said, no, you had, blah, blah, blah. So that is what I'm trying to tell you. In food, what is most important is if people like the taste and go back for it. Not because if you start analyzing, you will even analyze your mom's rajma chawal, which you have grown up eating. Because if your mom says, "Aaj theek bana hai," she's made the same thing. But today when she asks you, "Beta, aaj theek bana hai," you will say, "Mummy ne पूछा कुछ तो होगा. Let me overanalyze. नहीं मम्मा, आज salt थोड़ा कम हो गया." क्यों भाई? सीधा बोलो ना बहुत अच्छा बना है. बड़े हुए खाते हुए सीधा बोलो बहुत अच्छा है. बात खत्म हो गई. So that's the thing. And I say this with.
In fact, my ask.
Yeah, please go on.
No, go ahead.
I'm saying I say this with a lot of. I mean, I'm saying it in the right way. I'm saying every consumer is an expert, and he needs to be an expert because only the consumer knows what he likes best. But the R&D process should not be decided by that. Is what I'm trying to say.
Got it. Well, I think food is personal, so is God, religion, clothing. And you're entitled to have an opinion on every one of them. Nobody can tell you are right or wrong. It is yours and yours alone, right?
Absolutely.
So, on the feedback part, my wife cooks and then she asks me how is it, and I tell her when it's great, I tell her it's great. And when I give her feedback occasionally, when something is lacking, I tell her. And she would have asked me a moment prior and I would have said yes. And because we would have just begun the meal. And I'm waiting for a relaxed moment to say, yaar, thoda namak kam tha. And you said it was great when you were having. Abhi kyun bol rahe ho feedback de rahe ho ki ye kam tha, wo kam tha. So over a period of time, I've learned that, she cooks really well. So I've decided, even if a small thing is lacking, I'm never going to tell her. I'm just going to secretly add it and then absolutely. Just keep quiet about it rather than mess up her head.
There is a saying in this world, wife happy, life happy. So if you keep salt is a very easy thing to give her for one night, it's okay.
So
yes, absolutely.
So let's change. Can you still hear me, Viraj?
I can see you.
Okay. For some reason, I can't see your video.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm wondering if it's
You're
my
typing something. I can
internet connection. You can see me? Yes, okay. Alright. I was just trying to run a speed test, so I guess for some reason I'm not able to see you, but still. So tell me all of this when you built it the first time around. One is when you were involved with your family business, and then eventually you were involved with your own venture. Obviously, this growth does not happen with the right kind of leadership. How have those two ventures changed you, and what were some things you did personally or sort of watched out for, said, I'm not going to do this from a leadership perspective, building a team perspective? So talk about the leadership and the team building aspect a little bit.
So as I said, while I was talking about our two biggest strengths, the third thing was, as I mentioned, a fantastic team. So, Krishna, when I started away from the family business and all of that, I was very clear about one thing, that Viva will not be a mom and pop driven kind of a company. It will be a proper organization which hopefully at one time in our lives, at that time I used to think that, we'll attract some of the best talent and so on. And I was very clear about that. It will be a professionally run, good place to work in kind of a company. Today, I'm pleased to say that our team, our team will frankly make some of the biggest names in FMCG in India jealous. We have got a top-notch team. It was very difficult for me to get them in a few years back, and I had to woo some people more than I wooed my wife to get them to join Viva. But that was the name of the game at that time. Today, today Viva, we attract top quality talent. I don't have to woo them as much as I had to earlier. But today our talent is bar to none in the industry. I mean, as I said, probably really well talented people. Very early in my career, like at Viva, about 2015-16, I realized that alone I can only do so much, and if I need to grow, if I need to become big, I need good quality people helping me. Otherwise I can't do it. So if the person who's running, let's say, our operations or our sales or our finance, they need to be better at their particular job than me. Otherwise, what's the point? If my company is going to be limited by my talent, then my talent is the ceiling for the company. But if I say, and easier, one of the most difficult things I've had to do as an entrepreneur is letting go. It's always, in my opinion, always easier to do than to get it done. But if you put in that effort of getting it done for 4, 5, 6 months, and your relationship falls in place with that particular person, then life becomes very easy. Now, with my, some of the key people at my organization, I mean, the relationship is such. Some of them are very close friends. Some of them, some of them get me so well that the head of R&D, she and I can actually complete each other's sentences because we have been working together for such a long time. We totally know what each other we are thinking. So sometimes it's really weird. I will tell her, जो उसमें वो किया था ना, वो इसमें वैसे कर देना. And the person who's looking at us will think mad, bonkers people. But amazing thing is, she will understand what I'm saying, and she will also, say something along the same lines, and I will understand. So the team, frankly, is, I think, one of the biggest differences. I realized that early on in life, and I realized, or I learned how to let go of how do I put it? Like, I'm not saying power. Obviously, Viva is always mine, and I'll always be the head of Viva and all of that. But it is difficult to give up one department and let that person then run it, and you're only access to that department has to be through that leader. Because if you're keeping a leader and then you're undermining him by reaching to his number 2s and number 3s, then please don't keep a leader. You're better off without a leader in that department. So it's very important to hire a leader. Take 3, 4, 5 months to build the relationship and the trust. But once that is done, then I have to take a back seat. Otherwise, it's not fair on that person. Because if I intervene into that person's department, obviously his number 2s and number 3s will always want to be close to me. And since, especially when in most of the cases, those number 2s and number 3s were reporting into me before this, so the relationship is stronger and longer, in terms of time. So it becomes very important to set the ground rules, and I have learned it the hard way. Now it's very clear. I tell the person joining that 3-4 months you will take to take over from me. Those 3-4 months I will be involved with your team, and I make the team sit down and I tell them 3-4 months I'm involved. After 4 months, professionally, all professional related Viva related matters, personally we are friends, we'll always stay friends, but professionally all these matters will now go to the HOD and not to me. I mean, now we all have become a part of an organization that I don't have to spell out these things anymore, but earlier I had to. It was done, and yes, there is some amount of friction, there's some amount of churn and all of that, but I always feel as an entrepreneur, if you can, don't keep people in the gray. Let people know the blacks and whites of the thing, because gray is where, you know, and I always joke about this, अगर किसी से suicide commit करानी है ना, उसको 2 boss दे दो, वो suicide commit कर ले. So everybody should have one boss, because one boss works. 2 bosses does not work. So, you know, keep people in black and white. People like to know what they can do, what they cannot do, what are the limitations of the organization, what is the culture of the organization. And the entrepreneur has to always evolve. I'm the same guy who used to do everything himself, right? Because we could not afford top quality people. Then there comes a maybe 0 to 100 crores, you know, you're doing everything yourself. 100 to 200, you're learning to let go. 200 to 500, you know, you have to take a different role of a organizational leader who can, you know, influence his people. And then, you know, you have to take on a different role. So, like, my role is very important. Like, the culture of the organization is very, very important to me. You know, if we become a large company, but we are no longer nimble-footed, it will be a very sad day for me. So I ensure that the energy of a young company always stays, even as we grow in size. So that is something I keep with myself. I keep new products, new ranges, all of those to myself. Obviously, macro decisions like new plant, you know, we've got really big plants now. Remember that 70-ton order that I was talking to you when we got from Domino's, and I said, wow, life upset hai. At that time, it was 1 month's production. Today, it is like 5 to 10 minute production. You know, so plants have become big. Those things have become. So as an entrepreneur, you always have to evolve. If you do not evolve, if you do not, you know, but things which I keep close to myself are, you know, new product development, because that is the product which goes into the consumer. You know, that marketing, what the language that we speak to our consumers. So I will have a very significant influence on what the marketing which goes out to the consumer. I might not have involvement in the technical aspects of the marketing, you know, kitni reach ho rahi hai, kya ho raha hai, but what Viva as a brand is talking to the consumer is very important to my heart. So, you know, things like those, yeah.
Right. Well, the CEO is the best salesperson of any organization anyway. He has to be the best ambassador.
Yeah, but you know, which is frankly very unfair to every other salesperson, because let's see, if I am even the head of sales has to enter the sales meeting, please understand that because of my product knowledge, my passion for the company, I'm always going to be the best salesperson for the company. So you do not want to let the other, your department head, and you can go for a sales meeting alone, but your department head, you and the person who reports to him cannot go for a meeting, because that person will realize that mere boss se much more knowledge uske boss ko. So you have to keep these things kind of, you know, in your mind when you're dealing with so many people at the same time.
That's pretty interesting. Amazing. I've never had anybody talk about that in that way. Even if you do go to that meeting, I'm sure, or have to go into a meeting with that kind of a config, you have to be twice as careful not to undermine that other person, because ultimately you put all it is that person who's possibly facilitated it. Absolutely. And the last thing you do is undermine to look better than that person.
You just cannot look better than him. Then you're not doing your job. If you look better than him, you're not doing your job. You better don't go. Then go and look better than him.
I agree with you. I've seen in some of the industries that I've worked with and larger companies, we tend to take, you know, there is always this notion, the sales leader is supposed to be quite knowledgeable, and most of the time they actually unconsciously end up delegating upwards, saying, okay, I'm taking the president and the president will close the deal for me. So the president is possibly just the icing on the cake. If the president has to become your deal closer, then something's wrong with you. It is not supposed to be that way.
But fortunately, my team is not like that. My team is not like that. They don't need me to close deals. They're like our B2B team, especially where deals are closed in conference rooms. They're a fantastic team. They don't need me to close any deals. They So I'm just like like a brand ambassador / puppet that they make use of sometimes. But other than that, they don't need me for closing deals. And I don't even have to worry about their talent is exceptionally good. So I don't have to worry about it.
Let's talk about culture. You briefly touched upon it. Have you consciously built a culture, or has it evolved over a period of time? Regardless of what it is, what's the kind of culture you have?
So, culture, yes, I have very consciously built. See, we were, you have to understand, when we started out, we could not afford, like the best talent. Then there was a time that, we could afford the best talent, but that talent, I remember feeling kind of embarrassed about my office in one of the interviews I took with a very good company, senior professional, because our office was not, again, nothing wrong with that guy. He had always worked in MNCs, and MNCs come with the kind of office that they come with. I mean, he was used to it. We did not have Saturdays off till 2 years back. We were a 6-day week, and these were challenges. So one of the things I knew, that if we want to get good talent, the company needs to be a 5-day week company, because it's not, I have heard a lot of Indian entrepreneurs saying, यार उनको बड़ी अच्छी जिंदगी की आदत है. अब आदत है तो आदत है यार. Whatever, it's not अच्छी जिंदगी की आदत. It is what they have been working in for the last 20 years. If you want a top quality talent who's been having a 5-day working week, you cannot expect him to come to Viva on a 6-day working week. His wife will not only allow. Forget about anything else. So these things you have to keep in mind of. When we became a 5-day week company, it became easier to attract some of that talent. A good office made certain things easier. But more than that, culturally, so I have had meetings. So one of the things when I am interviewing for we as a company are people जो ज़मीन से उठ के बड़े हुए हैं. So I remember, I was interviewing this company for a CXO level job, and he said something. अरे मैं वहाँ जाके क्या करूँगा? सब कुछ online हो जाता है आज की डेट में. And I realized that a person like this, if he does not go there, because he will be taking over from me, and I'm a very leading from the front kind of a guy. But a guy like that who does not be with his people, he's only working from ERP. He will not. Maybe he's exceptionally good. So whenever I am hiring, especially in the senior people who will directly be influencing the culture of the organization going forward, I always am thinking I need the best talent. And part B, I want this talent to be able, I will know in the first 2-3 meetings or 4 meetings that will he gel in Viva's culture. So that is something that so like we call ourselves Viva family. We stand by each other as a family also. Yes, I'm the head of the family as the promoter and the founder, but the thing is, we stand by our people in any way. In tough times, we stand by people. We have a system of respect. The first line is, do not treat people the way you do not want to be treated. In sales in India, especially, there's a way of talking to salespeople, abusing, bad language, blah blah blah. Viva, that cannot happen. So I tell people, if you're okay, that's your senior abuses you, then you abuse your juniors. That does not mean you don't pull them up. You pull them up, but you cannot abuse. That culture is not allowed. Respect. We are an Indian company. Yes, the MNCs have a culture of first name, but if I have someone who's older than me, or much older than me, or 10 years older than me, if I put a G in front of his name, that does not mean that we become any less of a organization, I understand in the MNCs which come from US, the rule is everybody has to be called by first name. But the fact is that we are in India. So what is the problem if you have to put a G in some, not because of his rank, it can even be to a peon. But if the peon is 55 years old, why can't you put a G in front of his name? Because we are Indians at the end of the day. So the culture is a mix of Indian values as well as global outwardness. We do have flexible working hours, we do have flexible timings, and we do have these things also. We do have 5-day working weeks. We have a very transparent organization. All cabins, including mine, everybody's cabin is made of glass. You can see from one end of the office right to the extreme other end of the cafeteria. So all those things are there. But at the same time, I am conscious of the fact that this company is an Indian company, and I mean, I'm not cool enough to say, okay, let's be disrespectful or let's be like this towards our people. If you can respect someone who's older in age, I'm not saying, don't pull them up in their work or so on, but so it's a combination of the talent that we've got and their outlook and our Indianness. That's what the culture is. And frankly, it's worked for us, Krishna. We're almost like a politics-free organization. Everybody helps each other. The other thing is we work on WhatsApps. We do not work on emails. So you have a problem, ask that time, you get an immediate response. I hate the culture of me and my colleague is sitting 3 seats away, but to cover my ass, I will just write an email so that, so that is frowned upon. Go, talk to him, find a solution, and if it is money related and you need it on email for the record, put it on email for the record. But do not say that I've sent an email, my work is done, now forget about it. And if you need a permission, you're not getting it on email, put a WhatsApp, get a permission, move on. That's the way it should be.
Right.
Get it done.
So get it done.
Be respectful. Get it done.
Don't wait for.
Be nimble-footed, and that's our culture.
So, 2 more things. Decisions. What have been some decisions that have worked out, and what have been some decisions that you thought would work out and did?
Worked out, frankly, a lot of our decisions have worked out. I mean, launching retail, launching with the products that we thought we should launch in, some of those decisions have worked out very well for us. Putting up our second plant, you have to understand, our second plant is humongous. It's more than 10 acres in size. At that time, I was very worried that are we biting onto more than we can chew. And we built like a humongous facility over there, but it really paid off, especially in the last 1.5 years. It has really paid off. Capacity wasn't a constraint during this mess. Some of the automation we did, it was very expensive at the time, but it really paid off. So a lot of decisions have worked. Some have not worked. I have made 2 bad hiring decisions in my history at Viva. 2 CXO level bad hiring decisions were very tough on me emotionally, But when you know that it's not the right person, it's best to, not because of his problem, it can be a mutual thing, but it's best to just pull off the band-aid and move on. You just can't keep it. In 2 months you get to know, or in 3 months you get to know, then you just can't stagnate for another 9 months after that. That has been very heavy for me to do. And we launched a range of products. When I got some amount of success with these first 14 products, the second range that I decided to launch at that time was our range of tomato ketchups. And at that time, tomato ketchup is a large category, which is dominated by 2 of the country's biggest food brands. So I think I got into ketchup way earlier, burnt a lot of money in that. Now cut to last year, we relaunched our ketchups, and frankly now we're ready to be in that space. I think came into ketchup way before we should have. अपनी औकात से ज़्यादा बड़ी gamble ले ली थी. But now we have launched India's first preservative-free tomato ketchup range. We are advertising, we have distribution muscle, we have sustenance power. So I think that was one big mistake that I made, purely my fault. But that again taught us a lot that you need to stick to certain categories before you get certain amount of size. But if I had to put a score, more good decisions than bad decisions.
And do you ever obsess that you're going to any time at all, or rather lose sleep that all of this could be under attack, or you could lose all that hard work and where you've reached what you've reached?
All the time. All the time. But I mean, see, the thing is, I make it as difficult for. So if, let's say again, you were to open a sauce company tomorrow, or one of the biggest boys come in the sauce, in this area, what we have done is, we have now our revenue. We don't have one hero product that you come in this product and you will get 50% of Viva share. We've got multiple products with 5% share. Then we've got multiple products with 3% share. Then we've got multiple products with 2% share. So we don't have a big face and a very long tail. So you will have to come with 50 products to fight us. A, that is very difficult. B, even if you go and attack us in 1, 2, 3 cities, we won't make a dent. So you'll have to attack us in over 150 to 200 cities to make a dent. So we have spread ourselves in a way that, yes, saying this, obviously I'm scared all the time, because we have become of a size and stature that we, the big boys have started taking note of us, and that does worry me. I would be very foolish of me to lie here that, I don't worry about that. I worry about it all the time. So it is somewhere, and it also kind of keeps me on edge to do better, to be honest. So I don't want that worry to go. So keep trying, keep launching new products, keep doing tastier, better for your products. Yes.
So I presume you're profitable.
Yes.
Okay. So
maybe not in the last 2 months,
no
but yes, otherwise you're profitable. COVID, the second wave.
So there's no exit on the horizon.
Second exit for me.
For you selling Viva and then trying something all over again.
See, Krishna, the video quality is not so good, but you can't make out the white hair that I have on the side of on my head. I can't do this all over again. I can't build another distribution network all over again. I don't have it in me. So I will run Viva till the time, I don't see myself doing anything all over again. I have no intentions of selling as of right now. But if I do decide to sell maybe 10, 15, 20, 30, I don't know when. But if I do, I am not going to do it again. I can't build another distribution network in India. It's not going to happen for me. So as of right now, there are no plans to exit.
What about international?
Yes, we do have plans for international. One of our next growth engines will come for international. In fact, had COVID not happened last year, we would have started doing some decent work there. But that has been delayed indefinitely till the time the world becomes a better place.
Awesome. Viraj, this has been a fabulous conversation. You've gone into I loved a lot of the color around innovation, spotting products, the scale, and some of the nuances that you spoke about. And I was just listening to you in rapt attention because I didn't want to interrupt the flow. And I know you're going to scale greater peaks. The taste is unique. I think your leadership style, which is leading from the front, and the culture that you build, this doesn't happen by accident. There is definitely serendipitous accidents that happen, but there are also orchestrated stuff which I think you're working on. So this has been a fabulous conversation, and I say this to every founder that's on our show, that Maharajas of Scale will come back and then talk to you when you scale a new peak and when you conquer a new market or achieve greater heights. And I'm sure that will happen with Biba. This has been great. Any closing comments that you would like to add?
I frankly did not anticipate such a fun conversation, so thank you for that. I think we opened on the right note. You understand, sauces. You understand everything. It's been a really good conversation, and thank you for having me. It's been great time, and I love the conversation. Hope to catch up with you soon without
I seem to have lost
without
you.
the interview model in a better world. Yeah.
Hello?
I can hear you. I can hear you and see you. Yes, I can
Viraj,
hear
can
you
you hear
and
me?
see you.
Okay, I lost you there for a second. I was just asking any closing comments before.
Thank you for having me. I did not anticipate this to be such a wonderful conversation. Thank you, and it's such a great chat. It was really good. Didn't feel like a formal discussion. Thank you for making me so comfortable. Really good discussion, and did not. Really nice. Thank you so much for giving me the time.
Thank you, Viraj.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed listening to the show and want to help support our show, please leave us a review by visiting our website maharajasofscale.com/reviews. It helps other people like you discover the show. I totally appreciate your support. If you're a founder or an entrepreneur or anyone interested in or working with startups, this show is where you see discussions in depth about founder stories, their playbooks, and learn more about growth strategies. Visit our website for regular updates or wherever you get your podcasts and discover more awesome episodes. I'll see you on the next episode. Click on the bell icon and hit subscribe to get the latest episodes.